Alright, so this is Alum back with another video here, and this one's going to be interesting because not alone has the Chilean dev team from Mirandus released a ton of new updates for their deed layouts, but it's also been announced that Mirandus will be launching in just another 4 more days. So we'll go over all the deeds, the changes, how this is going to affect things, and then a little discussion of the potential launch and what the plans are here. So yeah, interesting. So going through here, review of the comparison of each of the deeds, and I'll be comparing from the old deed designs to the new ones, and also from the last iteration or work in progress number 1 to work in progress number 2 for every single deed. Then we'll go over the spreadsheet with all the different deeds and the plots and how those have changed, and we'll then look at to see which deeds got buffed compared to previous, and then which deeds got buffed or nerfed even more since then with this most recent iteration. How this changes the utilization of buildings because of all these extra building plots. And like I said, some launch plans, and then just some final thoughts. Alright, now we have a slide here with every single deed. Now this is the most recent work in progress number 2. And this kind of just gives an idea of the size comparison because everything is to scale, and I also took the time to label all of these deeds so you can kind of see just how large some of them are. Like the Archduke compared to, say, the Homestead. That's a pretty dramatic size difference. The towns are all quite large, and you can see quite a big discrepancy between the towns to the villages to the hamlets and then otherwise. It's interesting to see how the layouts have changed, and we'll go through those in the upcoming images and slides as well. So our first one here is the Humble Homestead, and on the left, and this applies for all the different images we're going to be looking at, we'll have the work in progress image, which is the one that they released maybe a month ago with the first iteration of the layout changes to the deeds. And on the right, we'll have the newest one, which just released in the last couple days. So with the changes here, the only thing that's really changed is they removed the area where that little decoration was in the bottom right, and they replaced it with a farming plot, which is almost identical to the way that the deed was originally. Essentially, they reverted the changes that they made because of backlash for people that purchased this deed thinking it was going to have a 5x5 building spot and a 5x5 farming plot, and it got nerfed. And this was only one of 2 deeds that essentially got nerfed. This one got a substantial nerf considering that it lost half of its production capability with a single change. And that change was kind of odd considering that their intention for making these changes were to make buildings more accessible such that people could better utilize their buildings. So the fact that they're removing things from deeds didn't really make a whole lot of sense. With that said, most of the deeds have been much more specialized, and this is one of the very few deeds, or at least early on deeds, that isn't directly farming related, that actually has a food related spot on it. And because they've added these back in, that gives 1,000 extra farming plots. Now here we have the image of the old one, the old being the original one from the American Mirandus team, and the new one on the right. And the only difference between the 2 images is the loss of the decoration, which I think was an oversight because work in progress number 1 had that decoration, and a inversion of the 5x5 building with the 5x5 farming plot. And I don't know really what their idea was there. Certainly if someone's coming up to your place to access a building, they're probably going to want to access the building first instead of having to go around the farming plot to access it, assuming that's a building to be used by other people. So a strange change. With that said, the homestead is essentially good as it is. I wouldn't really make any changes other than potentially reverting it completely back to the old design. Next up we have the Outpost, and something that you're going to notice with these new designs is that they added in walkways or roads or what have you to the individual deeds, which kind of gives you a sense of how you actually get from point A to point B, because previously it was kind of difficult to tell. Now that there's so many more buildings, it actually becomes a bit complicated to navigate some of these deeds. Not so much the outpost here because it's relatively small, but once you get to something like the size of a prince or archduke, those things are absolutely massive. So you're going to need some way of being able to traverse them easily. Now, in terms of changes, they didn't really make any changes at all to the outposts between Work in Progress 1 and Work in Progress 2. The only thing that was changed, as mentioned, was the addition of pathways. And frankly, I think the Outpost is in a really good place at the present, so I wouldn't really expect them to really make any other changes, and I don't think any other changes for the Outpost are really required at this point. Now here we see the comparison of the old design outposts compared to the newest one, and here you see a striking difference. It's a completely different deed. The number of 5x5s have increased dramatically, and we discussed this on the previous video. The addition of the 10x10, a larger decoration, and with a loss of the farming plots, the 4 farming plots that we see there, and that's most likely due to specialization, which is a trend that goes across all of the deeds. Nonetheless, like I said, there weren't any changes otherwise to this deed, so we will simply continue onwards here. Okay, now we have a change in the farming hamlet, and the changes which are relevant is the addition of a bunch of 5x5s, and from this image we can see that they added 6 new 5x5s, which is pretty significant, and honestly I don't think it really needed that many extra 5x5s, but the more the merrier, I guess. They have also added these long decorations. You can see on the right side those long blue structures. Now I don't know what kind of decorations are like that. It's quite odd, maybe like a row of trees or something. And also directly in front of the deed house, which is that brownish building in the center of the deed, you have a really large decoration, a 5x10, which is unique across the deed. So I'm not sure really where they're going with these changes. I'm quite happy with what I'm seeing here. I don't think the farming hamlet needs any additional changes, though. I think it's quite good as it is. Now, comparing the farming hamlet's new iteration compared to the very first design, there's obviously been a significant change. The shape of the farming hamlet's deed has changed to a rectangular shape as opposed to the more square shape that we saw with the farming hamlet. The number of entrances has also decreased from 4 to 3. It's also grown with adding all these additional 5x5s, these different unique decorations, and also the loss of the 4 ranching plots. As I've said, I think that the farming hamlet is currently in a good place, so I don't expect a whole lot, if anything, to really be done at this point forward with regards to the farming plot. And the next deed up on the list is the ranching hamlet. And not a whole lot of changes to the ranching hamlet. We can see the pathways have improved a little bit with a little more definition. The main thing we're seeing here is the addition of those 4 additional 5x5 buildings just to the left of the deed owner's home. And I think that matches fairly consistently with what we're seeing in terms of 5x5 potential between the farming hamlet and the ranching hamlet. So both of them currently now have 10 5x5 plots. And I think that's more of a balance thing that they kind of put in. And also, just in terms of total building utilization, 5x5s were a little bit underutilized. So I think this is a welcome change. And again, compared previous, like I was mentioning with the farming hamlet, I don't expect a whole lot of additional changes to be done to the ranching hamlet. I think it's currently in a good place. Now, comparing the ranching hamlet as is now compared to the original design, the biggest thing here is the loss of those 10 farming plots. And those farming plots would likely be helpful for raising the livestock on all these ranching plots. So there's going to be a lot of deed-to-deed trade required in order to support some of these deeds, which I'm very much for. The other thing is the addition of that 10 by 20 building just to the south of the deed owner's home. Now that particular building, such that it's not on balance, personally I think it should be limited to a large barn. One, because a large barn is really the most useful 10 by 20 building to have on a ranching hamlet. That and the fact that if it's not the case, then it starts to compete with some of the other deeds like villages and the like. So as long as that one change is made where that 10 by 20 is limited to a large barn, I think the ranching hamlet is fine as it is. Next up, we have the Village of the Farmer. And the Village of the Farmer, interestingly enough, was the first deed I ever sold. And I kind of sold it accidentally. I put it at a kind of a moonshot ask, and during the pump of 2021, it got snatched up while I wasn't really paying attention. Anyway, the changes between the Work in Progress 1 and Work in Progress 2 is, as you can see, it's essentially nothing. The only thing that we're seeing here is the addition of the paths. So we have a kind of a better idea how to get from one area to the other, and the fact that some buildings don't have paths to them directly kind of gives some insight as to what those buildings are being designed for. So next is the Village of the Farmer, the old compared to the current, and there's quite a bit of changes. The biggest thing, of course, that you can see is a lot of the farming plots have been converted to ranching, which I think is really strange that the Village of the, in quotes, farmer has more ranching than it has, in quotes, farming. They've also lost all of the decorations, and it now has 4 10 by 20 building plots, which I think is a little excessive. I can reasonably see it having a large granary, a large mill, and a large barn. The other additional 10 by 20 I don't think it should really have, and it kind of makes the deed a little too powerful from my perspective. On the most recent deed that they laid out, 2 of those buildings were different color of blue, and I'm not sure if that's accidental or intentional. My personal thought is those buildings should all be limited to food-related buildings only. Otherwise, you have a Village of the Farmer directly competing with other actual non-food-related deeds that are used for production and the like. So as long as they make that limitation, I think the Village of the Farmer is in a pretty good place. And despite the ranching being more prevalent than the farming, the math, which we'll kind of run through later, does work out given what we're seeing here. So yeah, it looks pretty good overall. Next up, we have the Village of the Baron. Now, what do I say about the Village of the Baron? So, the Village of the Baron was a relatively low-tier deed that got absolutely enormously buffed with this most recent Chilean team changing the deeds. And my biggest input after the last video was that this new Work in Progress 1 needs to be nerfed. They need to get rid of some of these 10 by 10s and instead replace them with 5 by 5s. And what we are seeing that, we're seeing some 5 by 5s being put up, and we've seen some of the 10 by 10s being removed. And they needed to remove the 10 by 10s and such because, first off, the deed was really overpowered for its tier, and there were also more 10 by 10 buildings than there are 10 by 10 building types, meaning you'd have multiples, be forced to have multiples of different buildings even if you didn't want them. Instead of that, however, they changed some of these 10 by 10s into 10 by 20s. So the Village of the Baron now has 4 10 by 20 plots, which is almost on par with the 2 villages that came after that were 2 and 3 times the Village of the Baron's price, respectively. So, yeah, they went in the wrong direction with this. This deed needs an absolutely massive nerf. It's way, way, way too overpowered for its price and tier, and I really don't know what they're thinking. Other than that, I kind of like the deed in itself. They just need to cut back on those 10 by 20s, probably knock out 2 or 3 of them, knock off a few more 10 by 10s, and pretty much call it a day at that point. Yeah, I like the Village of the Baron at this point. The original village, which we'll go into here in a sec, was quite limited, so they've definitely made strides to make this a more relevant deed, but they've gone from making it relevant to making it like absolutely ridiculous. We'll come in a little bit later with the point value and the math, but from our mom point value perspective, this deed has quadrupled in production capabilities. Now we can see the old, very humble Village of the Baron next to this mammoth of Village of the Baron there on the right. It is a completely different deed. It's gone from this quaint little backwards kind of village to this like mini town. Actually, there's, from a production perspective, the new Village of the Baron is actually more powerful than the town of the Duke was. So yeah, like I said, plain and simple, this deed needs a massive nerf. And I know the people listening to this that have Village of the Barons are not going to agree, but you guys are in a pretty good place already. You know, kind of take the win when you have it. Next up, we have the Village of the Viscount. And similar to what we saw with the Village of the Baron, the Viscount got a bunch of 5x5s, which it was in need of. And it also converted some of these 10x10s into 10x20s. Interestingly enough, the Village of the Viscount and the Village of the Baron both have the same number of 10x10s and the same number of 10x20s, even though the Village of the Viscount costs twice as much. So there's obviously a substantial discrepancy there. With that said, do I think this deed is too powered? Maybe slightly. They might want to knock off maybe a couple 10x10s and maybe one of the 10x20s. It does have a few other benefits over the Baron. I do like this design better. It also has 12 farming plots, and the Baron has no farming plots. The Village of the Viscount is probably in a relatively good place. The issue is the deed that comes after this, which we'll see in a sec here, is not much better than the Village of the Viscount. So it's hard to say if the Village of the Earl, which is what we'll discuss next, is too weak or if the Village of the Viscount is too strong. Personally, I think they just need to better balance between the Baron, the Viscount, and the Earl. Now on the left here you can see the old Village of the Viscount, which was my first deed I purchased, and the new Village of the Viscount. And honestly, the Village of the Viscount hasn't changed by all that much. Sure, it got a bit bigger, it's got some more buildings, it's got those 10x20s. It did lose its ranching plots, and it lost some of the decorations. Otherwise, though, yeah, not a whole lot of changes with the Village of the Viscount. So, some slight balancing issues between the other villages. Once that's taken care of, I think the Village of the Viscount is in a pretty good place. Ooh, the Village of the Earl. So the Village of the Earl was looking a little bit empty, especially in the bottom left corner there. Now with the addition of the detailed roadways and all these extra 5x5s, it's definitely looking a lot better. Also, as you can see, they've replaced some of the 10x10s with 10x20s. Now there's currently 5 10x20s, which is a solid number of 10x20s. Like originally the town of the Marquess only had 2 10x20s, so for a village to have 5 is pretty impressive. I think the Village of the Earl is in a relatively good place by itself. I just think the other ones, the Village of the Baron needs to get nerfed substantially, and maybe a slight nerf on the Village of the Viscount. Once that's done, I don't think any other changes need to be done to the Village of the Earl. It's a solid deed, and in its current iteration, I think anyone with a Village of the Earl would be relatively happy. Now here we see a change in the Village of the Earl originally to now, and there's obviously been a significant change. First off, it's like twice the size in terms of its blueprint. Secondarily, it's lost its ranching hamlet plots, it's lost a lot of its decorations, it lost kind of a lot of its symmetry, but it's gained significant production capabilities with the addition of 4 additional 10x20s and all these extra 10x10s. So yeah, like I said, I'm happy with the Village of the Earl. Not much more we need to say about it at this point. Town of the Marquis. Now, I'm a little disappointed with the Town of the Marquis. Its previous iteration, I think, was absolute perfection. Now, I do understand why they made the changes, and I'll tell you the changes that it made. So on the very top there, you see all that farming, and that also the 20 by 20 building is likely for a grand granary. Now there's 15 Town of the Marquis and there's 15 grand granaries. So it would make sense that that would be a grand granary building, and if they removed it, they'd likely make something that's going to use 15 grand granaries somewhere else, and they've done just that. So the Town of the Archduke, which there's 5, has a spot that looks similar to what we're seeing in the Work in Progress 1 for Town of the Marquis. And Town of the Prince, which there's 10 of, has another spot that's similar to what we're seeing in the Work in Progress 1 for Town of the Marquis. So 10 plus 5, of course, is 15. So what they essentially did is shifted the farming capability from the Town of the Marquis, which I was previously calling, in quotes, the Town of the Farmer, because that's essentially what it was, to the higher tier deeds. Unfortunately, they didn't really do a whole lot to compensate. The only thing that they did to change with this new Work in Progress is they added some 5x5s and a few decorations. That's nowhere near as valuable as that 20 by 20 building plot and all the farming, and the amount of farming that was lost was 44 plots, so it lost over 50% of its farming. To compensate for that, the Town of the Marquis should be getting either another 20 by 20 building or having some additional 10 by 20s. Right now it's quite lacking compared to the next deed, which is the Duke, and the Duke and the Marquis price-wise were almost identical. And at one point they were actually identical. So there's really no reason why this deed should be way weaker than the next deed. So yeah, this deed needs a buff after a substantial nerf from the last iteration. With that said, it's still doing really well compared to how it was back in the day. Like 4 additional 10 by 20 plots, say 20 by 20 plots, and a bunch of larger decorations in addition to more buildings in general. It's not that it's in a bad place, it's that it's not keeping up with the buffs from the other deeds, and from its price perspective and total production capability, or what we call the mom point value, it's definitely lacking after this substantial farming related nerf. So needs a bit of a buff to get in line with the other deeds. Once that's done, I think this deed is right where it needs to be. The Town of the Duke. So the Town of the Duke went from a very nice design to an even better design, and one that makes more sense from a layout perspective. A lot of this kind of empty space that we're seeing on the Work in Progress 1 has now been filled in with another section of farming at the very top, another 20 by 20 building just below the 20 by 20 building deed home, and the addition of a bunch of 5x5s and 10 by 10 spread throughout the deeds. So this deed's spacing is really nice now. Its production capability is very powerful, and overall has a really nice design. This is one of the very few deeds that I actually like more, even from an aesthetics perspective, in its current iteration compared to the original design. So, and as someone who's owned at one point multiple Town of the Dukes and is currently running a Town of the Duke as well, I'm quite happy with this. I don't think it needs any changes whatsoever, and I hope they just leave things as is at this point. Now, comparing the old Town of the Duke to the new one, first off, you see the new one is much larger, and this is kind of a trend that's going across all the deeds. We also can see a nice interconnected pathway system. We can see way more production capabilities, a better overall design as well. The previous one was just a rectangle. This one has all these fancy entranceways, and yeah, this is just a much better deed. So I think pretty much anyone with a Town of the Duke was going to be quite pleased with what they're seeing here. And like I said, no changes really need to be done at this point. Now, the Town of the Prince has improved significantly since Work in Progress 1. The Town of the Prince was just plain ugly. I described it as a tsunami hit by a hurricane after an earthquake, and yeah, that was a pretty accurate description. Now, with all this increased definition, a bunch of additional buildings, both 5x5s, 10x10s, 10x20s, 20x20s, and even our very first Majestic, which we can see in the mid right side there, a 20 by 40 plot, which were originally only supposed to be on the citadels, one of the 5 citadels. Now you're seeing them on some of the towns as well, and that's massive. From a point value perspective, we'll come into later, but this one has double that of the Duke, so its total production capability is double, and that's consistent with its price point, which was double on the store. I do like the overall layout here now with all this design. It's got some decent decorations, although I think it could use a little bit more. It also has that nice, really fancy and large farming area that's segregated from the rest of the town. And I think that really helps to make kind of the aesthetics work. It's also, that farming area is also still kind of within the town's main walls, so it's also well protected. So yeah, I went from absolutely loving the Town of the Prince on their very original design, being my favorite design, to absolutely despising it, to again being quite content with what I'm seeing here. In the work in progress too, I don't think the Town of the Prince needs to have any changes whatsoever. I think it's absolutely perfect the way it is, and I think the Chilean team's actually done a really good and well thought out job on this particular deed. Now, the old Town of the Prince was best known for its absolutely massive decorations, especially right in front of the deed owner's home. The new one, though, the size, look at the size of this thing. It's literally more than twice the size. It has more than double the amount of larges, 4 times the amount of grands. It has a majestic, way more farming, has more ranching. It has, like, this thing is an absolute monster at this point. And that's saying something, because we haven't even gotten to the big deeds yet. We haven't talked about the Archduke, we haven't talked about the citadels. Yeah, this is going to be something when you're inside. I can see people getting lost in this place. It's going to be massive. So yeah, people with Town of the Princes, I'm sure, dancing the happy dance at this point. I don't think there needs to be any changes whatsoever, and good job on the Chilean team with this particular deed. Oh my, look at the difference on this one. Town of the Archduke. Lots of changes. First off, that really blank area in the top left is no longer there, and that's been redesigned to the very north of the deed, which is turned into a absolute farming mecca. Tons of more production capabilities, lots more buildings, 10 by 20s, some more 20 by 20s, 2 20 by 40s, 2 majestic plots on this deed now, which is absolutely massive. And better than all of that, the moat is back. Around the deed owner's home, that was something that was lacking from the original design. But yeah, like, look at this thing. The previous one, I think, was kind of just a rushed in quotes, we are working on the deeds and we should show you something. And now they're actually showing us what their direction was. From a point value perspective, it's exactly 50% stronger than the Town of the Prince, and on the store this was a 50% more expensive than Town of the Prince. The design is really good, the accessibility is good, it's defensible, it's well proportioned. Yeah, I'm quite pleased with what I'm seeing here. I don't have any suggestions whatsoever, nor do I think any changes should be made. So another good job on the hands of the Chilean team. I've been quite critical with regards to the Chilean team, but after 8 months, they're actually starting to show some stuff. So we'll make some more videos in this near future here and see if I should be holding my tongue or if what I'm saying actually makes sense. Now look at this, the old Town of the Archduke, which was massive by the record. In Valheim, I made it to scale Town of the Archduke. Actually, I made it to scale every deed, but the Town of the Archduke, walking at a normal speed, took 6.5 minutes to walk around. This new one is more than twice that size, so I would expect probably 14-15 minutes to walk around, and I'd expect probably 3 or 4 minutes just to walk from one side to the other. So this is going to be a big deed, and they don't really give you the awe and kind of the sense compared to how big these things actually are. So this is going to be an absolute monster inside. I know we have a Archduke within the Mom Guild, and they were quite happy as well to see what become of this mammoth deed. I don't think any changes need to be made, and we'll simply continue on. So here's the overview of all the deeds. So at the top, all the way across there, we have all the old deeds, which was from the original Mirandus team. In the center, we have all of the new deeds, which is work in progress iteration number 2. And the bottom, we have the change in the new deeds and the old deeds. And what we can kind of see is at the bottom right, we can see that farming plots have become rarer and all the other plots have become more plentiful. Now, the number of farming plots actually became less rare compared to work in progress 1 because they added farming to the homestead, and there's 1,000 homesteads, so that's 1,000 additional farming plots. As a result of this, I adjusted our point value system to weight the farming plot to ranching plot point ratio. And that changed a few of the deeds a little bit. Now, if we go to the center set of rows, which are the new deeds, and we look at the far column, point value, we can see that the general trend looks pretty good. The issues come when it gets to that of the Village of the Baron, Village of the Viscount, Village of the Earl, 167, 172, and 189 respectively. Those deeds were dramatically different price-wise, from a relative price of 20,000, 40,000, 60,000. Yet there's only about a 10% point value difference between the Baron to the Earl, despite a 200% price increase. So, like I was saying before, there needs to be some adjustment there. Otherwise, the Marquess is a little short of the Duke, and it shouldn't be that short. The Duke is perfectly aligned with the Prince, and the Archduke is perfectly aligned with the Prince as well. So a little bit of issues in the villages and the Marquis. Other than that, though, everything makes sense from a calculation perspective. All the numbers work out on all the deeds, and as a general overview, things are looking quite good from what I'm seeing here. Next up, we have the work in progress 1 versus work in progress 2. Now, the left side's a little blurry for whatever reason. I'm not sure. But we can see in the work in progress 1, some of the deeds got a significant buff. Now, this percent change is compared to the original Mirandus team's deed layouts, with the nerf to the homestead because it lost its farming, and the farming Hamlet lost a bit of points as well, relatively because of the changes of loss of ranching. That has all been adjusted now. The homestead is no longer losing any points because it got its farming back. The farming Hamlet got those additional 5x5, so it's now in a buff status. The Archduke got a massive buff, 73% compared to the base, up to 283% buff. That's just massive. The Town of the Prince as well, from 130 to 276, and then for whatever reason, they made a substantial buff of the most buff deed. As I mentioned many times, Village of the Baron, 207 to 302%. Quadruple the production capability on the Village of the Baron. I don't know if the dev team all have Village of the Barons or what's going on there, but mathematically, logically, and pretty much any other reason you can think of, there's no reason for the Village of the Baron to be that strong. Yeah, like I said, they need to change it. But otherwise, yeah, things are looking pretty good. Most people, I think, are quite happy with the changes they're seeing to the deeds, and I do expect they make one further iteration to the deeds, kind of to clean things up, and I would suspect that things would be as close to being as balanced and perfect as you can get at that point. Now, this picture here has to do with the utilization of the deeds, specifically looking if something is oversupplied. So an issue before was that there were tons and tons of buildings and almost no plots to put them on. And that particular reason is the kind of the premise behind the Chilean team adjusting the deeds, because you had all these people with buildings that felt like they were getting ripped off because they simply can't use them, and I would be inclined to agree with that general thought process. This newest work in progress, because of all these additional ones, have further improved the changes. As we can see, the 5x5s have a very small amount of oversupply now, and I would expect some oversupply due to there being a lot of tents, which are probably not going to be all used, and also some people have lost their wallets and forgot about it, etc. So they're not going to all be used in that regards. Also to remember, all of these different plot types do not include the citadels. And the citadels are large, so you can expect that there to be a lot of plots of each size on the citadels as well. So with only a 26% oversupply in the smalls, I think that's good. The medium got improved significantly, down to 108% oversupply. Now the mediums have a couple buildings, the 10 by 10 barns and the 10 by 10 camps, which are way too prevalent. And there's no way you can really adjust the deeds in a way that would make them fully useful. So I think you're going to have to simply live with the 10 by 10s being over accessed. The large, interestingly enough, even without the citadels, there's more large plots than there are large buildings right now. And we're also seeing the grands, almost a 93% reduction in oversupply. So the large and the grand buildings, which most people don't have a lot of, are now going to be incredibly sought after. So if Mirandus is actually successful at all, these people who own deeds that can use large and grand buildings are going to be wanting to pay top dollar for them. And other people that don't own deeds who want to place on the deeds now that they actually have places to use them will also be looking to buy those buildings as well. The Majestic we added to this one because the Prince and the Archduke now have Majestic plots. I can't really compare the oversupply and stuff before because there was no previous plots of the Majestic type on the deeds. Nonetheless, when you add in this 5 citadels, I think Majestics are going to be popular. Next up, we have the launch plans for Mirandus. So, there was a recent announcement in the last few hours that says the Mirandus, in quotes, public preview build launches November 15th. And this is a permanent build. So, previously we had playtests for either a few days or a couple weeks, and then the server would come down. This would happen maybe once or twice a year. Starting on November 15th, Mirandus will be up all the time. Minus maybe updating for patches or server maintenance or whatever. To be involved, you need an exemplar to play, so human, dwarf, orc, halfling, or an elf. You only need one. They didn't give details onto everything that's going to be accessible, but the previous playtests you could also utilize your Lantern of the Sun and Ring of Discord. Lantern of the Sun being incredibly useful because of the light it emits, and the Ring of Discord being slightly useful with a small amount of light, but also helps you to find other people, and it's kind of a cool looking item, a little blue glowing ring. I think it's fairly unlikely that you'll see deeds, buildings, horses, docks, boats, or any other of the Mirandus NFTs being accessible at this point, at least upon initial launch. They also haven't mentioned anything with regards to play to earn, so I don't know if you'll actually be earning. I do know that the mobs will be dropping, in quotes, Materium, although whether or not this is test Materium versus real Materium is hard to say. And also, if it is test Materium, will that test Materium be converted into real Materium like we saw with Silk in Spider Tanks? So a lot of unknowns, which makes it a little difficult to plan. What I will be doing is reviewing some of the maps that I made based off of game files that I was looking into, just to kind of get a better idea, a little head start. But if there's no actual earning potential this early on, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference. With that said, it will be nice to actually have something to play for a change. It's been a long time, and interestingly enough, this is 4 years since the original announcement of the sale of Mirandus NFTs. So consider this a 4-year gift or birthday. Either way, I will definitely be playing as much as humanly possible, and I will also be updating with some videos once things get to a more stable level, including some guides such that people know how to enter the game easily. And last up, just some final thoughts. So yeah, look at those deeds though, right? I'm liking what I'm seeing here. I'm pretty happy overall. The Chilean team has also been releasing a ton of new content on their Discord and such as well. And the timing of this, in addition to all the Discord content, seems to coincide directly with another game. And this other game is called Mooncast. which is an up-and-coming game from the several of the devs that worked on Mirandus that were fired back in March of this year. And I get the impression that the CEO of Gala Games was not terribly happy that they fired this team to, in quotes, accelerate Mirandus. Yet Mirandus, that was in development for 4 years, was actually getting to the point where it could be behind a game that was only in development for a few months. As a result of that, they've been really pushing forward with Mirandus. So even if Mooncast, which is related to Bodhi, doesn't become a success, at the very least it'll be successful for pushing Mirandus forward. So that's an interesting take on things. With regards to the guild, Mom will definitely be playing Mirandus when it comes out. We'll be much more focused in playing when we know there's not going to be any progress loss and that earnings are turned on. We'll be full swing ahead. Other than that, I've been kind of getting a few odds and ends, what's required to update my deeds to these new iteration designs, and look forward to seeing the next and or final work in progress or final deed layouts, and to actually get in the game. Something we've been waiting for like I said, for 4 years now. So yeah, it's looking pretty good, and we'll see what's happening. I'll be continuing to make videos, and anyone that wants to watch them can. I'm mostly making these videos for my personal reference so I can review them to see how things have changed over time. And if anyone wants to watch and get some insight in my thoughts and kind of where I think things are going, then feel free to do so, and hope you enjoy. Okay, until next time.